Hey you guys, welcome back. Today I'm working on a really fun project for one of my really fun clients, and it's yet another t-shirt quilt, but this one's extra cool because it's all like funky shirts from different concerts. She's got some really great stuff in here, so I'm really enjoying this project. Anyways, if you've seen my other videos, I have a very long scale video that walks you through from start to finish on how to create a t-shirt quilt, but today we're just gonna go over like my 5 quick tips. So if you're in a rush, you're trying to get started, just grab your supplies and I'm going to show you the 5 things that really matter to pull off a nice clean t-shirt quilt. Have a whole pile of shirts. They're all different shapes and sizes, and a lot of people who sit down to sew their first t-shirt quilt, they think, okay, the first thing I need to do is cut up all my shirts, which is true, but they go and they start cutting them into rectangles. They start cutting them into squares. Do not do that. What I like to do is I cut right down the seam of the side of each shirt, so I have this whole space, collar included. It gives me tons and tons of fabric to work with. I do not recommend cutting your shirts apart until you have affixed some stabilizer to them, something to keep them nice and flat. I like to use this fusible, lightweight Pellon interfacing, and I'm going to show you in my next step how you can fix this to the back of your shirts before you trim them down. All right, guys, so the reason you need stabilizer is this. This is jersey. Look how, stretchy, it's gonna move. You can sew all this stuff together and your quilt top might look great, but over years, it's gonna stretch and it's definitely gonna lose its shape. All right, so I'm gonna show you how I attach a piece of this interfacing. So I like to use my nice big ironing mat. I can put it out on a dining room table or whatever, nice flat space, especially because these shirts are large and they like to wrinkle and curl. And then what I'm going to do is when I open up my interfacing, I'm going to make sure I feel for the rough side. This side has teeny tiny little glue dots on it, so you can tell, which side is which pretty easily. This is the end of my last bolt. I like to bring it right up here under the collar, so I make sure I get the whole image. It's a nice width for just about any t-shirt. It's going to give you more than enough. And as you can see, there's a big tear in this. Doesn't matter. It's still going to stick down just fine. So you don't need to worry about tossing that. Don't waste it. The other thing is you can use scraps and piece them together, just by pressing them, like a little puzzle. If you have smaller pieces or, you're down to the end of your bolt and you got like one shirt left. That's not a problem either. So anyways, as you can see, I just spritzed it with some water. That just helps to conduct the heat a little bit better. And I'm just gently pressing with my hot iron. And when you get it good and stuck, you can actually visually see in the fibers there that those little glue dots have kind of blended in a little bit more. They don't look as perfectly white and circular. When you see that, you've got a good stick. So you just want to gently kind of like lift and press. You don't want to iron like you would normally by pushing it around, because these are both pretty lightweight fabrics here, and they're going to shift and move, and then you're going to lose your nice flat t-shirt. So anyways, like I said, wrinkles, tears don't really matter in the interfacing. It all comes out pretty easily in the pressing process. So there we go. I like to make sure I get the edges all the way out to the edges. Okay. And perfect. Like I said, I never trim my shirts first, because when I'm piecing it all together, sometimes I realize I may need it just slightly wider or slightly longer. This gives me the opportunity to have as much fabric to work with as possible, so I don't run into any problems. And, so what if I have to trim off just a little bit? To me, it's worth it to spend an extra, 10 cents and lose this little strip of interfacing than get to a point in my quilt and all of a sudden realize that I don't have enough fabric to work with to piece this together. Because if there's one thing you don't want to do in a t-shirt quilt, you don't want to have to slice into the image. You want the whole image on the front. All right, you guys, so for the most part, when you're attaching interfacing to jersey material that t-shirts are made from, it goes on pretty flat and smooth. This shirt is an older shirt. It's been stretched and worn and washed a lot, and it has like a couple different ripples in it. And I really want this to be nice and flat and smooth. So occasionally, especially if I'm working with something that's different than a t-shirt, like maybe a piece of a uniform or something like that, or sometimes I've put things like their cheer costumes or dance costumes in, and it's just a different texture of fabric that might need a little extra TLC in the pressing department. You may need to, for whatever reason, iron on the front of the shirt. Now you have to be very careful with this, because a lot of these printed shirts, you can really easily melt the image, and it's going to come off on your iron, and you don't want that. So this shirt's kind of an older shirt, you know, it's been through the wash a lot. I wouldn't be as concerned with this, but a shirt like this one here that has this really thick red printing on it, I guarantee that I could melt that in a split second with my iron. Don't notice and you keep ironing, then you're gonna get that red everywhere else. So there's a simple solution to this. You can get it right at your grocery store. You're gonna wanna get some parchment paper, not wax paper, not freezer paper, parchment paper. So the parchment paper will provide a protective layer so that you can go ahead and iron your shirts or whatever just fine. And that way you don't have to worry about melting the image. You know, you're definitely gonna, even if you don't have to, you know, touch up any of your shirts like I just did, you're still going to want to have this, because at the end of the quilt, when you sew all your pieces together, you're going to want to be pressing the front nice and flat so it looks good before you attach your batting and your backing. Okay, so here we have two shirts, and as you can see, this one has a much smaller image, not just lengthwise, but also widthwise than this shirt over here. That's going to be extremely common across the board anytime you make one of these quilts. The number one thing about a t-shirt quilt is it's not about just cutting everything up into squares and sewing them all together like easy peasy. It really becomes like building a puzzle, because you have to make smaller images work with larger images. And in that case, I need to make sure I have enough fabric as possible to work with. If I decide that I want to put these two shirts in the same column, for example, I'm going to need to make sure that I've got this one, you know, all the way covering the whole image. And if I had already trimmed this one shorter, they're not going to line up. And then I'm going to be in trouble. The only way to work around that is to potentially add some borders, you know, which you can do and it can look cool. That brings me to my next tip, which is going to be creative. So like I said, putting together a t-shirt quilt is just like building a puzzle. There's several different ways you can do it. You can cut up a bunch of different shapes like this and then work them into a larger block. Like you can see this quilt here. I built blocks out of multiple different size shirts. I pieced them together and then I sewed those bigger blocks into the quilt top, and it gives a really cool, funky, you know, all over kind of feel. Probably the easiest way if you're a beginner is to do like what I'm showing you here, columns. So, you know, set your shirts up into columns and then you can, you know, cut them the same width, but different lengths and sew these long columns, and then you can sew your long columns together. And that's a really easy way to build a t-shirt quilt from start to finish. If you want to see an example of that, go over and check out my long t-shirt quilt video, my beginner's guide. It'll walk you through all the steps on how to do a nice, easy column design for your first quilt. Now, you can also do like what you see a lot, which is the checkerboard, like this one here. That is actually very tricky. If you're a beginner, there's definitely a learning curve when it comes to matching up all those corners to try and make your columns and your rows give that nice squared off shape. So if you really want it that way, that nice clean way, you can also take a look at my t-shirt quilt video and I'll walk you through the more advanced version. The other way to do it is if you say you don't have very many shirts. Here's an example where I had a high school student who played the saxophone. She only had 4 shirts. So really we just built out an entire quilt and then added her 4 shirts in using some borders that correlated with her, the different themes from each band concert. Now, here's a few other examples of quilts that I've done. This one, for example, was just little patches of different pieces of clothing that her mom wore when she was sick and passing away. This one is very extensive that I did for a high school graduate. It had her college colors coming up. She was going to Virginia Tech. We worked in dance uniforms. We worked in photographs. We even worked in her Girl Scout uniforms, which was probably one of my favorite touches of all time. So, and here's another one where she had quite a lot of shirts and different things going on, but it was really important to her mom that there was also fabrics worked in that correlated with, so she was a redhead, so we used a fire fabric, for example. Okay, you guys, so as you can see from all those projects, the sky's the limit when it comes to these quilts. In my opinion, like the more you put into them, the more fun they get. If you end up cutting a shirt too short or something, don't freak out about it. Just figure out a way to add a border or a little extra piece. Sometimes what I'll do is say I have like a really bright blue print on the left side of my quilt and I cut a piece short on the right side. I might just take a piece from, you know, the sleeve or the back side, whatever, and use that to just create a nice blue pop of color to patch up that one that I cut wrong, you know, on the opposite side of the quilt. Other times too, I might find sometimes you have shirts that have smaller pieces you might not use. Save them, set them aside. They might make a good little filler if you end up, you know, coming out not quite what you think. Because again, at the end of the day, this is jersey. It stretches, it moves, you know, it's not the same as working with like a quilter weight cotton that when you cut it at a 6x6 square, it's going to stay at a 6x6 square. So you just got to be a little flexible, be creative, like I said. And at the end of the day, you're making a beautiful handmade gift for someone or for yourself, and you're going to love it. It's going to look great. That's all that matters. So don't freak out about it. So last but not least, the most important tip to have in pretty much any sewing project is you want to have the right tools for the job. So we've already talked about parchment paper and interfacing. I've mentioned my ironing mat that I love so much. And the one great thing about this nice big one is, like you can see, I can take time to double it over. That's always a good idea if you're doing a lot of ironing like this kind of project. You want to make sure you protect your surface below. I wouldn't want to warp my cutting mat, or if you're working on a nice dining room table, you could do a lot of damage. So that's one of the things that makes this great. The other thing, of course, I have is just my little spray bottle, which is just a recycled bottle, and of course my iron. You know, I love this iron. It's an AWESOME iron, so as you can see, when I make contact with it, it drops when I'm ironing, and if I take my hand off, it's going to lift it up so that it doesn't accidentally scorch the surface. It's really cool. It also has like a nice 12-foot cord, which makes it great if you're ironing specifically for crafting or sewing. The other thing that is really, really important is to have the right cutting tools. So you will see me use this in almost every project I have. You know, I have my nice cutting mat, of course, and then I have a lovely Omni Grid 6x24" ruler because it's see-through. It makes it really easy for me to see what I'm doing. I can easily line up along the edge of my shirt to give myself a good idea of the width I'm working with. And then, of course, I love my Olfa rotary cutter. They come in all different sizes. The big ones are great for this project, makes it nice and clean, easy cut, just like this, you know, so you have a good squared off piece to work with. Okay, gang, I just wanted to bring you in close to show you my 3 preferred cutting tools. So aside from my Olfa rotary cutter, which I should mention, I only use Olfa blades. They're German steel. They just last longer. They stay sharper than a lot of the Chinese imitation steel blades that you'll find on Amazon. But aside from that, I like to have my 2 sets of sewing scissors. These ones are big and comfortable. They're great for when you're cutting up all those shirts. Your hands can really get tired after cutting up a big pile of shirts, especially if your scissors are dull. And then I always love these little just sharp nippers, you know, for the end of the project when you need to snip those little threads and stuff. These are very comfortable for working with. And last but not least, one of my most important sewing tools is a simple roll of masking tape. When I start to build out the top of my quilt, however I've decided to do it, whether I'm doing in blocks or rows or columns, I need to be able to label my shirts because you're going to go through this process of pressing and trimming, and then you can lose track of them. So I like to, when I have them all laid out on the floor, when I'm working out my design, I'll take a photo of it, and then I will take my masking tape and I will label where each quilt belongs in the project. So if I ever get lost along the way, I can look back at my photo and I can check my masking tape labels, and I'm not going to screw up my design, and it just makes things really simple and easy. So So anyways, I hope you guys found these tips really helpful. Again, there's links for all of these tools down below. There is a link for my extensive beginner guide to t-shirt quilts. And if you have any questions, as always, please leave them down in the comments. Thank you so much for staying tuned, and I love to hear from you guys. So I hope you're doing wonderful. Take care, and I'll see you next time.